This is Oral Rehab Lecture 9, Part 3, Screencast 3, continuing the discussion of the consumer decisions that need to be completed in the context of hearing aid fitting. Starting here at Slide 8 in your Lecture 9 slide series. Historically, the notion of type of hearing aid is historic to some extent and sort of represents, in a way, if we think about it, the miniaturization that's occurred based on hearing aids. So we're going from the relatively larger hearing aids to relatively smaller hearing aids. Remember that in hearing aid technology, there was always a compromise between the cosmetics, which is usually say, let's make it smaller as possible, versus the engineering. And we could also think, really what we're thinking about is performance. So in that sense, there's always been a conflict, if you will, between the engineering characteristics versus cosmetics. Over the next couple slides, we'll look at these different types of hearing aids. Again, the major point is that there is these two different families, if you will, one of which requires an ear mold or a coupler to take the electronic output of the hearing aid and drop it in the ear. The second family, the second style, is the in-the-ear hearing aids, in which the actual electronics are built into the ear shell. From a historical point of view, it's probably good to note that the in-the-ear hearing aids basically came into prominence in the 1970s, this having to do mostly with miniaturization of the hearing aid components. The microphones and the receivers were finally sort of stable and miniaturized electronically, that they could now be fit into the shell of the ear molds. And so really from the 1960s and 70s to present day, the behind the ears and the in the ear hearing aids have kind of cycled back and forth. When there was a proliferation of the in-the-ear hearing aids, the behind-the-ear hearing aids sort of as market share went down. Well, this engineering kind of thing, as the hearing aids now have trended to where there are digital processors in there from a size point of view, initially then that sort of has led to the behind the ears going up, meaning the in the ears kind of going down. So from a market share point of view, it's probably about half, maybe even actually there's probably more behind the ear aids now than there are in the ears. That's really kind of transformed the hearing aid manufacturing landscape. Again, from the 1970s through the 1990s, there had to be factories located all throughout, access points, and mostly, by the way, the in-the-ear product was really more an American variant, which is not a surprise because it was more cosmetically, acceptable, let's say. The behind-the-ear hearing aids were always sort of the European products, and so they had less prominence over maybe the 1970s through the through the 1990s, but once we got into the 2000s, at that time period now, we're now talking about primarily digital processors where there's computers in the hearing aids, and now sort of the pendulum has kind of swung back toward the behind the ear product. But it is we can get the digital processors now into the in-the-ear hearing aids, but it's kind of when we want more features and options, there's more space available in the behind the ear. So, all right. So if we think then about this notion of a coupler, we said that the major one of the major distinctions is that one whole style, if you will, of type of hearing aid requires an ear mold or a coupler. I don't have a picture in this slide set, but if you go to the Scow and Nurbin book, pages 42 to 44, there's some nice pictures of those. The pictures I have in the next couple slides, you can kind of see a little bit, but much better if you look to the textbook and you see those pictures. So what does an ear mold do? Fundamentally, it anchors the hearing aid to the person's ear. The ear mold itself can be taken in and out of the ear. The ear mold is attached to the hearing aid. And again, its basic purpose, though, is to take the sound that's coming out of the hearing aid, the receiver, remember that's the output transducer, and put it in the ear canal. And there's usually a tube that forms one sort of a continuation of a pipe that delivers the sound into the ear canal. And then there's a plastic piece that surrounds the tubing, or the tubing sort of inserts into a harder plastic. So this tubing is generally soft, and generally is part of is inserted into a hard. And actually, the material that most of these ear molds is traditionally made out of is made out of lucite, which is a brand name for an acrylic plastic. This is, if you don't know, acrylics are the plastic that people get nail additions built on, or I don't know what you exactly call them, except you call them acrylics. It's also kind of the material, if that's not a reference point for you, is the material that your auto windshields are made out of. It's like that kind of hard plastic. And then there's a hole drilled through that, and then the soft plastic tube runs through that. These soft tubes, have to be replaced periodically, every maybe a couple of months, as they sort of oxidize and get harder, and they lose their flexibility. And so they would have to go back to the hearing aid audiologist or the dispenser and get the tube replaced. It's like a 30-second replacement to do that. The ear molds themselves, there is some logic to the size and other characteristics of the ear mold that could enhance the fitting. Again, one of the other interesting cycles back and forth is, as technology increases, the level of interest in ear molds decreases. Going the other way, when technology is relatively flat, there's interest in ear molds because of that's another way to enhance the signal. Another way to think about it is that the acoustic output of the hearing aid, whatever it is, as good as it may be, still has to run through the coupler. And so the coupler, whether it's an ear mold or it's just the acoustics of an ear canal in the ear type of fitting, we always refer to it as the final filter. So no matter what the hearing aid is doing, it still's got to run through that final coupler. And so it is possible, and again, I don't know how often this happens, so certainly it's possible, that you could have a really good fit hearing aid and you put it into somehow a really bad, acoustically bad ear mold, and you could actually sort of, it would be counterproductive. You wouldn't get the output that you would want if that would be the case. Ear molds are custom made to fit the ear so that they're made to be comfortable. As part of this custom fitting process, it's possible that they're not fit well and in fact could actually hurt the person or cause some soreness. And if that's the case, then the audiologist or dispenser needs to monitor that and either make a new earpiece or grind it down, buff it down, polish it up to make it fit so that there's not any discomfort. It's also possible that the person doesn't get the hearing aid in their ear correctly. It's a custom-built product to the specific spaces of the outer ear, and if they don't get it in the ear exactly where it's supposed to be, it's possible for a person to just kind of jam it in there, but it's not going to be aligned correctly, and there's going to be then some points of soreness. So I'll see a person comes in, they complain, oh, my ear hurts. The hearing aid doesn't fit right, my ear hurts. And I look at it, and they don't have it aligned in their ear right, and there'll be some typical sort of hot spots, sore spots, where they don't have it seated correctly. And that's now a question of education, of saying, re-instructing them to get this into their ear correctly. But that's partially is up to the user of the hearing aid to get it in there correctly. Again, as I mentioned to you, there's also these stock pieces that are often used. In a contemporary type of product is called the receiver in the canal product. I'll show you a slide coming up here that typically doesn't use tubing at all, but rather has a stock tip, and there's a wire that connects the receiver, which is in the ear canal, to the product, to the actual sort of coupler piece that's in the ear canal. But there's a greater distance between the hearing aid and the actual output transducer. And this allows actually for a slightly smaller behind the ear product and has some other advantages as well. And that's called a RIC, or a receiver type of product. And again, that typically doesn't use an earpiece, but uses a stock tip that contains the output transducer. Well, if we go way back, here's a body type of hearing aid. And again, if you got to remember, the original hearing aids were sort of products of the telephone company. And again, this has some interesting features here. The microphone is there. That goes to an amplifier, which is there, but it needs batteries, and the batteries are strapped. There was two different, in the earlier versions of this, two different cans of batteries. Now, if you got to remember, what is a battery? A battery is a can of chemicals, and so that's going through a chemical process. I've never worn one of these, but I'm told by users of these hearing aids that and by anecdotal reports that these things in the chemical reactions, which are sort of strapped on your legs here, there was like sort of two canisters, got hot. They got physically hot. And so not only that, you had these wires all over the place, and ultimately the product has to go to the output here, and so there'd be a little output receiver worn actually up at the ear. So there's a lot of stuff going on here with this particular kind of product. Wires and cables and sort of external products. But from the period of around whatever, the 1920 to whenever, the mid, probably 1930s, this was the state of the art. Moving to sort of probably relatively somewhere around the 1940s is when hearing aids sort of became ear level. And one of the first places they put the hearing aid was sort of in the eyeglasses. Now this worked because there weren't that many fronts that, for people to wear. There was probably one or two standard woman's eyeglasses front, maybe one standard male type of eyeglasses. This was actually not a bad deal because if you think about it, you could put the microphone here and then the receiver there and attach it right to an ear mold. And so from a conspicuous point of view, it was part of the equipment that you're wearing as part of your glasses. And again, so look and be your best, because here you go. You've got the idea that it's kind of inconspicuous because it's part of your eyeglasses. These have fallen into disfavor, into disuse, primarily because the fronts of eyeglasses now became a fashion item, and you needed to be able to couple the hearing aid, which that would be the hearing aid, to the front. And therefore you'd have to have a certain screw setting and a certain configuration at this hinge. So the hinge had to be compatible with the front. Well, now that we've come to a time period, over the last 20, 25 years where eyeglasses are fashionable and they're non-standard, the hinges have gotten out of control, so there's no way for a manufacturer of the glasses aid to sort of align with all of the fashion eyeglass choices. And or it would constrain the user's eyeglasses choices to a certain degree that they would just not, want to choose their eyeglasses based on their hearing aid choice. So they've kind of fallen out of disfavor, although there were certain, advantages just simply on this use, when it worked really good. Let's put it that way. The disadvantage also is that if you have a problem with one, you have to send it away and you lose the other. So, if you need your new lenses in your glasses, you lose your hearing aid while that's being done. If the hearing aid needs to be repaired, you can detach it and maybe give them a loaner and reattach it. So it imposes some additional problems. Otherwise, a person loses their glasses. So that's those are all problematic issues with this. We talk about then the behind the ear product, again, a fairly standard today product. Here's the actual hearing aid you can see, and in the upper picture here you see some tubing going down, and we can't see it in this picture, but there's an ear mold there. So again, if you look at pages 42 to 44, what you have to kind of consider is that there is a tubing that forms the extension of the output of the hearing aid. So if this is the hearing aid, there's the microphone is in here, the amplifier is over in there. And here's your different switches, your sort of on-off. This is a toggle to go through different programs. Your battery is in there. And then ultimately, the output of the hearing aid, the receiver, is there, and it's dropping the sound out and this way. And again, you need it to be coupled so it's going toward the person's ear canal. So there's a tubing. And again, the tubing then is surrounded by a plastic earpiece which now fits in the person's ear. So the ear mold itself is this harder plastic, occasionally it's made out of a softer plastic too. This actually can be made out of silicone, so that the actual materials here, can be specified based on a variety of factors and needs. But fundamentally, what it is that the earpiece itself is a housing to basically guide this sound tube into the ear canal. In that other variant here that I showed you, or mentioned, but now show you, is that RIC type of product. Here's that same behind the ear kind of stuff, but the receiver now is in here. There's where the receiver is, and is inside this little tip. And then this plastic coupler is a stock piece, so that there's nothing out in this part of the ear canal. This is a wire, basically. It's a wire, not an acoustic tube, and that connects up to the loudspeaker, which is now pushed deeper in the ear canal. So there's some acoustic advantages, but also it makes it for a more slender profile. This product can be a little bit smaller as well. Okay, with that, we'll adjourn to screencast 3. Or we'll adjourn out of this screencast into whatever the next one is.